Welcome everyone to another edition of IAG's Trade Talk. My name is Ben Blaschke, Managing Editor of IAG, and of course, very pleased once again to talk to well-known gaming consultant, David Green. David, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Ben. You look pretty well too.
Well, going okay, David. Just enjoying the world coming out of lockdown gradually, so things slightly getting back to normal.
Yeah.
Of course, David, it's been another busy few days in the global gaming and the regional gaming landscape. Of course, after everything that's happened with Crown Resorts recently, the news broke on Sunday by some Australian media outlets that Star Entertainment Group is allegedly also been enabling money laundering, organised crime, fraud and foreign interference. That's just allegations, of course, by these media outlets at this stage. But very closely mirrors what we heard about Crown 2 years ago. And of course, that led to an inquiry in New South Wales and Royal Commissions in Victoria and Western Australia. So, David, I'm very interested to get your thoughts now on where we are with Star, of course, after all this. First of all, what's your initial reaction to what's happened here? And how do you think this compares to what we first heard about Crown a couple of years ago?
I'm not entirely surprised by what's occurred. In fact, this is not a new set of allegations, I guess. If you go back as far as 2012, there was an expose, I believe, in one of the daily newspapers in Sydney to the effect that Star had been dealing with trade-associated junket representatives. At that time, Star was, I believe, under the ownership of Tabcorp, and it transferred around that time to what was then Echo Entertainment. It's not surprising because everyone in the Australian industry who's been able to has been drinking at the same well, which is mainland China. And of course, to access that, they face common issues. One of the issues being the unenforceable nature of debts in the mainland, where those debts are incurred for gaming purposes. So the traditional junket role has been intermediation, and so it has been that a number of prominent junkets have developed with, I think, preferential access to players in that market. Unfortunately, many of them have been tainted by reputation or by their actual dealings with some air of criminality. And I think that's really what's flowing through now with the allegations that the Star's been associated with Sun City, which of course was implicated in the Crown inquiry when that was conducted in New South Wales by the former Justice Bergen.
David, we look at junket operations around Asia, and they're commonplace in the Philippines, Cambodia. Most places where there's a large-scale casino, there are junket operations. I guess the Australian operators would argue they were following suit in that regard, but did they err from day one in potentially dealing with junkets?
Well, I think one would have to question the amount of due diligence that was actually done. There was a lot of material in the public domain around what had been alleged to be improper or unlawful conduct by some junkets. There was some reliance, I suspect, on the fact that a number of them were licensed in Macau under its licensing regime. But I guess that regime represented quite a low bar to be hurdled by junket operators. And it didn't relieve casino operators from their obligation to ensure that those engagements that they undertook with those people were not heavily risk-oriented.
Of course, as I said, 2 years ago, we saw similar media allegations there against Crown. That, of course, led to an inquiry in New South Wales and 2 Royal Commissions that are ongoing. We're expecting Crown's Victorian Royal Commission recommendations to be handed down this week. How do you see the Star situation playing out now? Could we be heading down a similar road there?
Well, I think it's interesting that the regulator appears to have been blindsided by this. Judging by comments made by the chairman recently, they appear to have had no forewarning that this was likely to happen. And to some extent, that is unexpected, because I think the revelations in Bergen would have suggested that there may have been a need to make a closer and more immediate inquiry into the affairs of the Star than has been the case. Now, of course, there is a regulatory review being undertaken or about to be undertaken in New South Wales, I believe by Adam Bell, the senior counsel in the Bergen case. Now, he's certainly far from naive. He's almost fully informed on the attributes or otherwise of some of these junket operators. So I think one would have to say that his inquiry is going to be turbocharged because of these new revelations. Whether it progresses into anything beyond a regular review style inquiry and scope of inquiry into something more full-blown, like a Royal Commission, I don't know. At this stage, I don't know that there's a case established for that. I think Mr. Bell is probably well placed to do the necessary investigative work and to prepare a report for the regulator. But if the regulator was unaware, one wonders whether politically that's such a safe course for the government to pursue. They may prefer to go with a full Royal Commission and have Mr. Bell assist that Royal Commission and still undertake his investigations.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it, David, with the timing? As you said, the regular review was due. So that may be sufficient then if, if Adam Bell then takes that, takes a look at what's been aired as well. I guess that could be instead of having to go down the Royal Commission route, but that may happen too.
Look, it's entirely possible. Royal Commissions are something that obviously has far-reaching powers, certainly beyond any inquiry which might be commissioned by the regulator. And of course, the reports go directly to government and Parliament. So I can see that there might be justification for that. But having said that, when you get Royal Commissions that cost upwards of $15, $20 million to convene, it's not something that governments rush into. So it depends how much political pressure there is to go down that route. And at the moment, I don't see that it would be necessarily in anyone's interest to do that. But let's see what Adam Bell comes back with.
Of course, we also heard about a month or two ago that AUSTRAC, the Australian Financial Crimes Watchdog, is looking at all three operators in Australia, Crown, Star and SkyCity, over potentially serious breaches of anti-money laundering laws. What does that tell us as well, just about, I guess, about the Australian casino industry in general and what's been going on there?
I think there have been a couple of issues for the casino industry generally, and it's not limited to Australia. The first is related to what are called politically exposed people. These are persons who have political affiliations in another jurisdiction. And the associated implications of that are that when they're in casinos or involved in casino activity, their suspicions by nature are considered suspicious. What's the source of their funding, for example? Is it politically influenced? Are they spending their own money? And that leads on to the question of normal transactions which might be considered suspicious. So judgment calls have to be made by casinos in regard to what they consider suspicious. Guidelines have undoubtedly been provided, but there are still judgment calls that need to be made. And unfortunately, casinos have an inherent conflict of interest in doing that, because in promoting their business, they're very keen to get high rollers, but in getting high rollers, the risk profile associated with them is generally far elevated above what we might call a grind player, the non-credit small bet player. So I think this is not an unexpected development. I think AUSTRAC has been wrestling for some time with how best to try and monitor these transactions and provide better guidance for the casinos. But at the same time, they've had business imperatives, which I suspect have not sat comfortably with some of those guidelines.
If we're looking at New South Wales in particular, for example, David, given that Star and Crown both have operations in Sydney, which is Crown non-gaming at the moment, but still hoping to get its casino license for Crown Sydney. Could there be a reluctance for governments, given what's happened to Crown, to then go after the other casino operator? I mean, in a way, for want of putting it a better way, to take down a whole industry?
Well, it's not in their financial interest to take down the whole industry, as in to eliminate it. But I think there's an underlying fallacy here that if they were to take action against the existing operators, there would be no casino industry. There are many operators globally who would relish the opportunity to be involved in casino operations in Australia, should that opportunity arise. And this is an argument which Crown is obviously maintaining in Victoria, that because it's such a large single-site employer, it would be very difficult for it to be removed from the market because of risks to jobs and opportunities for people and supply chains. Now, I don't buy that, and similarly, I don't buy that it's an obstruction for government to apply its own rules, and that is ensure that its casino operators are suitable people to conduct those casino businesses.
Of course, Star itself has recently proposed selling off 49% of the Star Sydney to raise capital for expansion. It's previously proposed a merger with Crown, currently off the table, but could be revisited. What does this do for those plans of Star moving forward, at least in the short term?
Oh, I think it represents a short-term frustration to those plans. It would be extremely difficult for a Victorian regulator at this point to give approval for a merger like that. And I think now it would also be inconceivable that the New South Wales regulator would agree to that. Overlaid on that, of course, is still the concern about the ACCC, the Competition and Consumer Commission. It may well decide that any attempt to consolidate the industry, particularly amongst two operators who are under a cloud in regard to their suitability, would not be a favourable development. And quite aside from what the state regulators do, the ACCC may have a position that it would not agree to that merger proceeding.
And I guess, David, the other big news this week, as we said, is we're expecting the findings of the Victorian Royal Commission into Crown to be handed down this week by Commissioner Finkelstein. What are your thoughts? What are you expecting from that?
I think from what the Commission has already indicated through body language and verbally, that most likely Crown will be found unsuitable to operate Crown Melbourne. I think the question is what follows from that. That recommendation that he makes following unsuitability will go to the regulator in Victoria. My expectation is that he may not recommend a withdrawal of licence. The more likely is that some period of probation, possibly a suspension of licence, while Crown develops plans that are satisfactory to the regulator to reconstruct itself in a way that ensures ongoing suitability. The complication that has just arisen now, which Commissioner Finkelstein won't have had an opportunity to consider, is that two recently approved board appointees, Nigel Morrison and what's the other guy's name?
Bruce Carter, I think, was the...
Yeah, Bruce Carter, thank you. Who've both been cleared to join the Crown Resorts Board, were directors of Sky City in both New Zealand and Australia operations. Sky City, of course, has now been swept up in the net of those who might be of interest to AUSTRAC. So it presents a complication that the Commissioner won't have foreseen, I suspect. That won't compromise his report, but it does overlay another degree of uncertainty, I suppose, when it gets to the Victorian regulator as to just how it evaluates the Crown situation then.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit more to play out, David. Just lastly, of course, slightly different situation heading into learning the recommendations of Commissioner Finkelstein. Of course, when we heard the recommendations of Patricia Bergen in New South Wales, Crown was yet to make any wholesale changes. Since then, there've been a board makeover. There's been significant changes at the executive level. To what extent do you expect the Commissioner to take those into account in handing down his recommendations in Melbourne?
I think that they will note that that's occurred, but I'm not sure that that changes anything. I mean, it's just a redefinition of the global of the organisation chart of the group, and the proof is always going to be in the execution of change. An execution is not a 5-minute exercise. We're looking probably at, I would think, 2 to 3 years before there will be cultural change, before the risk management function will have fully bedded down, before the new chief executive in Crown has really got his feet under the table and understands the business. So those factors, I think, are always going to be uncertainties which will attend any restructure. And while the restructure is an important first step, it's by no means the end of the story.
Well, thanks, David. I'm sure you'll be keeping a close eye on how this all plays out for Crown and Star and Sky City over the coming days and weeks and months. Great to talk to you again, David.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for your time.
And everyone else, look forward to our next version of Trade Talk.